Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories and it'll keep sending more your way. Story 1: The Hitchhiker Who Wouldn't Leave. My name is Jake, and I've been driving long haul for 15 years. I've seen my share of strange things on the road, but nothing prepared me for what happened on Interstate 80 through Nebraska last winter. It was around 2 a.m., and the snow was coming down hard. Visibility was terrible, maybe 50 feet at most. I was thinking about pulling over at the next truck stop when I saw her, a woman in a white dress standing on the side of the highway, thumb out. No coat, no shoes, just that thin white dress. Now, I don't usually pick up hitchhikers. Company policy and all that. But seeing her out there in the freezing cold, I couldn't just drive past. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "You need help, ma'am?" I called out. She walked over to my truck, and that's when I got my first good look at her. She was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair that was completely dry despite the snow. Her skin was pale as milk, and her eyes were the strangest shade of gray I'd ever seen. "I need to get to Denver," she said. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but I heard every word clear as day over the wind and snow. "I'm heading that way," I told her. "Climb on up." She got in without another word. Didn't thank me, didn't make small talk. Just sat there staring straight ahead while I pulled back onto the highway. I tried starting a conversation a few times, asking where she was from, what she was doing out there, but she never answered. Just kept staring ahead with those gray eyes. After about an hour, I started feeling sleepy. Not unusual for a night drive, but this was different. My eyelids felt heavy, like someone was pulling them down. I shook my head, rolled down the window a crack for some cold air, but the drowsiness kept getting worse. "You should rest," the woman said suddenly. It was the first thing she'd said since getting in the truck. "Can't rest," I mumbled. "Got to drive." "Pull over," she said. "Rest." Her voice had this hypnotic quality to it, like she was singing me a lullaby. Part of me wanted to do exactly what she said, but the rational part of my brain was screaming warnings. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and forced my eyes to stay open. That's when I noticed something in my side mirror. There was another truck behind me, maybe a quarter-mile back, but it was gaining fast. Too fast for these road conditions. As it got closer, I could see the driver frantically flashing his high beams and honking his horn. "Someone's trying to get my attention," I said, glancing at the woman. She was still staring straight ahead, but now there was something different about her expression. Angry, maybe? Or hungry? The other truck pulled alongside me in the passing lane. The driver was rolling down his window, shouting something I couldn't hear over the wind. He was pointing at my truck, making gestures for me to pull over. I slowed down and rolled my window down further. "What?" I yelled back. "Your passenger!" he shouted. "Look at your passenger!" I turned to look at the woman, and my blood went cold. She wasn't there. The seat was empty. But I could still feel her presence, still smell this strange, sweet scent like flowers left too long in water. "Where did she go?" I whispered to myself. "Behind you," came her voice, right next to my ear. I spun around, and there she was, standing in the sleeper compartment of my cab. But she wasn't the same woman who'd gotten in my truck. Her white dress was torn and dirty, her hair was tangled with leaves and debris, and her skin had a grayish tint to it. Worst of all, her eyes were completely black now, like looking into empty holes. "You should have rested when I told you to," she said, and her voice was different too. Deeper, with an echo like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded on the icy road, and I fought to keep it from jackknifing. The other trucker had to swerve to avoid hitting me as I came to a stop on the shoulder. When I turned around again, she was gone. Completely gone. No sign she'd ever been there except for that lingering smell of rotting flowers. The other trucker had pulled over behind me. He came running up to my truck, a big guy with a beard and a concerned look on his face. "You okay, buddy?" he asked as I climbed down from the cab. "Did you see her?" I asked. "The woman in the white dress?" He nodded grimly. "I've been following you for 20 miles, trying to get your attention. She was sitting in your passenger seat 1 minute, then she was gone, then she was in the back of your cab. I've never seen anything like it." "What was she?" "I don't know, but I've heard stories. Truckers talk about a woman in white who appears on this stretch of highway. They say she died in a car accident here years ago, and now she tries to get drivers to crash in the same spot where she died." We both looked around at the empty highway. The snow was still falling, but lighter now. In the distance, I could see what looked like an old memorial cross stuck in the ground beside the road. "I need some coffee," I said, my hands still shaking. "There's a truck stop about 10 miles up," he told me. "Follow me. I'll buy you a cup and you can tell me exactly what happened." I climbed back into my truck, and that's when I noticed something on the passenger seat. A single white flower, wilted and brown around the edges. I picked it up with 2 fingers and threw it out the window as fast as I could. At the truck stop, I learned from other drivers that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The woman in white had been seen dozens of times over the years, always on snowy nights, always trying to make drivers fall asleep at the wheel. Some of them had crashed. A few had died. I finished my run to Denver, but I took a different route home. I've driven through Nebraska plenty of times since then, but never at night, and never when it's snowing. Some risks just aren't worth taking, no matter how much you want to help someone. The funny thing is, I still have that flower smell in my truck sometimes, faint but unmistakable. My mechanic says there's nothing wrong with the ventilation system, and I've had the cab detailed twice, but the smell comes back every now and then. It reminds me that there are things out there on the dark highways that we don't understand, things that are hungry and patient and very, very dangerous. And the next time I see someone standing on the side of the road in the middle of a snowstorm, I'll just keep on driving. Story 2: The fuel stop that wasn't there. This happened to me about 3 years ago, and I still can't explain it. I was driving from Phoenix to Albuquerque, running low on fuel in the middle of the Arizona desert. It was one of those scorching summer days where the heat makes the air shimmer like water. I knew I was cutting it close on fuel, but my GPS showed a truck stop coming up in about 15 miles. I'd stopped there before Murphy's Desert Stop, right off Highway 40. Good food, clean restrooms, friendly staff. I was looking forward to stretching my legs and getting some of their famous green chili burgers. As I got closer, I started seeing the signs. Murphy's Desert Stop 10 miles. Then, 5 miles. Everything looked normal. The desert stretched out on both sides, nothing but scrub brush and red rocks as far as you could see. Then I saw the exit sign. Murphy's Desert Stop next right. I put on my signal and took the off-ramp, same as I had a dozen times before. But something was different. The access road seemed longer than usual, and there were no power lines running alongside it like there normally were. The asphalt looked older too, cracked and faded. I figured maybe they'd done some construction since my last time through. When I finally reached the truck stop, I knew something was wrong. The building looked the same from a distance, but as I got closer, I could see the paint was peeling and the windows were dirty. The parking lot was cracked, with weeds growing through the asphalt. And it was completely empty, no other trucks, no cars, nothing. I parked near the fuel pumps and climbed down from my cab. The heat hit me like walking into an oven, but that wasn't unusual for Arizona in July. What was unusual was the complete silence. No traffic noise from the highway, no air conditioning units humming, no sound at all except the wind blowing across the desert. The fuel pumps looked old and rusty, like they hadn't been used in years. I tried swiping my credit card, but nothing happened. The display screen was cracked and dark. I tried the other pumps, but they were all the same dead. I walked toward the building, hoping someone inside could help me. The front door was heavy glass with metal handles, just like I remembered, but when I pulled on it, it was locked. I cupped my hands against the glass and looked inside. The place was gutted. Empty shelves, dust covering everything, no lights on. In the dim light filtering through the dirty windows, I could see that tables and chairs were scattered around like people had left in a hurry. There was a calendar on the wall behind what used to be the counter, but I couldn't make out the date from outside. I walked around the building, looking for another entrance, or maybe an office where someone might be working. That's when I found the loading dock and back. The metal door was partially open, so I called out. "Hello? Anybody here? I need fuel." My voice echoed back to me, but there was no answer. I decided to take a look inside, just to see if there was a working phone I could use to call for help. The interior of the building was even worse than it looked from outside. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. The floor was littered with old newspapers and debris. I picked up one of the newspapers to check the date, and my heart nearly stopped. It was from 1987, 36 years ago. I dropped the paper and backed toward the door. This was impossible. I'd been here just 6 months ago. I'd eaten lunch here, talked to the manager, bought a new CB radio from their electronics section. They were faint at first, like people talking in another room. I followed the sound toward what used to be the restaurant area. The voices got clearer as I got closer, multiple people having conversations, the clink of dishes, the sound of a cash register. But there was no one there. The restaurant was as empty and dusty as the rest of the building. Yet I could hear everything clear as day, a waitress asking if someone wanted more coffee, a trucker complaining about traffic, a child asking his mother for ice cream. I stood there listening to these phantom conversations, and slowly I started to recognize some of the voices. There was Betty, the waitress who always remembered how I liked my eggs. There was old Frank, the regular customer who sat at the counter every day telling stories about his days as a long-haul driver. There was Murphy himself, the owner, with his thick Brooklyn accent. All people I'd known. All people who should still be here, running this place like they had for years. I pulled out my cell phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Not even one bar. I ran back outside, hoping to get better reception, but still nothing. It was like the whole area was dead. My truck was still where I'd parked it, but now I noticed something I'd missed before. The fuel gauge showed empty. Completely empty. That was impossible. I'd had at least a quarter tank when I pulled in. I tried starting the engine, but it just turned over without catching. I was stranded in the middle of the desert at an abandoned truck stop that shouldn't exist, with no fuel and no way to call for help. That's when I saw the other truck. It was parked on the far side of the lot, behind the building where I hadn't noticed it before. An old Peterbilt, probably from the 1980s, with a faded blue paint job. I walked over to it, hoping the driver might have some extra fuel, or at least a working radio. The cab was empty, but the keys were in the ignition. There was a logbook open on the passenger seat. I picked it up and looked at the last entry. It was dated August 15, 1987, and it was signed by someone named Dave Morrison. The entry said, "Stopped at Murphy's for fuel. Strange place. Nobody around, but I can hear voices. Truck won't start. Going to wait for help." That was the last entry in the book. I dropped the logbook and ran back to my truck. I tried the engine again, pumping the gas pedal, but nothing. I was starting to panic when I heard my name being called. "Hey! Over here!" I looked around and saw another trucker waving at me from the highway. He was standing next to a modern Kenworth, and he was real, not a ghost or a phantom. I ran toward him as fast as I could. "What are you doing out there?" he asked as I reached the fence between the truck stop and the highway. "My truck ran out of fuel," I said. "I stopped at Murphy's, but the place is abandoned." He looked confused. "Murphy's? There's no truck stop here, buddy. This is just empty desert. Has been for as long as I can remember." I turned around to point at the building, but it wasn't there. Nothing was there except scrub brush and rocks. No building, no fuel pumps, no old Peterbilt. Even the access road was gone. My truck was sitting in the middle of the desert about 50 yards from the highway, like it had always been there. The other trucker helped me get some fuel, and my truck started right up. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank, just like it should have. He followed me to the next real truck stop, where I tried to make sense of what had happened. I asked the manager there about Murphy's Desert Stop. He'd never heard of it. I checked online and found some old records of a truck stop that burned down in 1987 somewhere in this area. The owner's name was Murphy. 3 people died in the fire, including the owner and a waitress named Betty. I still drive this route regularly, but I always make sure I have plenty of fuel before I get to that stretch of desert. And sometimes, when the heat is really bad and the air is shimmering, I think I can see buildings in the distance that aren't really there. The desert has a way of holding on to things, keeping them preserved like insects in amber. Some places don't know they're supposed to be gone, and they keep on existing in the spaces between what's real and what used to be. I learned to be very careful about where I stop for fuel after that day. Not every place you see is really there, and not every door you open leads to where you think it will. Story 3: The CB Radio Voices. My name is Carol, and I've been driving trucks for 22 years. I'm one of the few women in this business, and I've had to prove myself more times than I can count. But nothing I faced from difficult customers or skeptical dispatchers prepared me for what happened on Highway 50 through Nevada. They call Highway 50 the loneliest road in America. And they're not wrong. It's 287 miles of empty desert between Carson City and Ely, with nothing but sagebrush, mountains, and endless sky. Most people find it boring. I've always found it peaceful. I was hauling electronics from California to Denver, running night shifts to avoid the desert heat. It was around midnight when I passed through Austin, Nevada, if you can call 3 buildings and a gas station a town. The next stop would be Eureka, still 2 hours away. That's when my CB radio started acting up. At first, it was just static, which wasn't unusual in the mountains. But then I started hearing voices. Not the usual trucker chatter, these were different. Older somehow, with a quality that made them sound far away even though they were coming through clear. The first voice I heard was a man with a deep, gravelly tone. "Breaker 19, this is Dusty Dog eastbound on the 50. Anyone got their ears on?" I picked up my handset. "This is Mountain Mama westbound." "I got you, Dusty Dog. What's your 20? There was a long pause then. "Just past mile marker 127, Mountain Mama. How about you?" I looked at my odometer. I was at mile marker 145. He should be behind me, but when I checked my mirrors, the highway was empty in both directions. "I'm showing mile marker 145, Dusty Dog. I don't see you back there." Another pause. "That's strange, Mountain Mama. I'm looking at my speedometer, and I'm doing 75. Been doing 75 for the last hour. Should have caught up to you by now." A chill ran down my spine. If he'd been doing 75 for an hour and was at mile marker 127 an hour ago, he should be at mile marker 202 by now, not still at 127. "Dusty Dog, what year is your rig?" "She's a 79 Peterbilt," came the reply. "About the prettiest truck you ever did see. Chrome bumpers, running lights, the whole 9 yards. 1979, that was 44 years ago. No trucker would call a truck that old, like it was new." Before I could respond, another voice broke in. This one was a woman with a slight southern accent. "Y'all mind if I join this conversation? This is Desert Rose northbound on 93, but I can hear you clear as crystal." Highway 93 intersected with Highway 50 at Ely, still 100 miles ahead of me. "Desert Rose, this is Mountain Mama. What's your location?" "Just south of Alamo," she said. "Been driving all night, trying to make it to Salt Lake by morning. Y'all sound like good company for the road." Alamo was on Highway 93, about 150 miles southeast of where I was. There was no way she should be able to hear my CB transmissions, and definitely no way they should sound clear as crystal. "Desert Rose, what year is it?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She laughed, a light musical sound. "What kind of question is that, honey? It's 1983, of course. September 15th, 1983. Why do you ask? My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. It was July 2023. Dusty Dog, are you still there? Still here, Mountain Mama. Say, what did you mean when you asked about the year? What year do you think it is, Dusty Dog? Why, it's 1979. October 23rd, 1979. Strangest thing to ask a fellow. I pulled over at the next turnout and sat there with the engine idling, staring at the CB radio. This was impossible. I was talking to truckers from decades ago, people who were probably dead by now. Mountain Mama, you gone quiet on us, Desert Rose said. Everything all right? I'm fine, I lied. Just thinking. Well, don't think too hard, Dusty Dog chimed in. Thinking never got nobody nowhere on the lonesome highway. More voices started joining the conversation. A trucker called Nevada Jim, who said it was 1965 and he was driving a load of mining equipment to Tonopah. A woman named Silver Bell, who claimed it was 1991 and she was hauling cattle to Reno. A man called Highway Ghost, who said it was 1955 and wouldn't say what he was hauling. They all had different years, different decades, but they could all hear each other perfectly. And they could all hear me. Mountain Mama, Silver Bell said, you sound different from the rest of us. Your voice has a strange quality to it. Strange how? Like you're calling from real far away. Farther than distance, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what she meant. To them, I was the ghost. I was the voice from another time, reaching back through the decades to touch their world. Tell me about the road, I said. What do you see out there? Same as always, Nevada Jim replied. Empty desert, stars bright enough to read by, and that feeling like you're the only person left in the world. Mountains on both sides, added Dusty Dog. Roads stretching out like a black ribbon, going on forever. Sometimes I see lights in the distance, Highway Ghost said quietly. Lights that don't belong to any town I know. They follow me sometimes. I see them too, Desert Rose whispered. Dancing lights off in the hills. Pretty but scary at the same time. I looked out at the desert around me. In the distance, I could see faint lights moving among the mountains. Not stars, not aircraft, something else entirely. They're still there, I said. The lights. I can see them right now. There was silence on the radio for a long moment. What year did you say it was for you, Mountain Mama? Silver Bell asked. 2023. July 15th, 2023. Another long silence. Well, I'll be, Dusty Dog finally said. That's a long way from now. How is this possible? I asked. How are we talking to each other across all these years? Highway 50 is a strange road, Highway Ghost said. Always has been. Time moves different out here. Past, present, future, they all get mixed up sometimes, especially at night. Some say it's the desert, Nevada Jim added. All that emptiness, all that silence, creates spaces where things that shouldn't happen do happen. Or maybe, Desert Rose said softly, maybe we're all just lonely drivers looking for some company on a lonesome road, and the universe takes pity on us sometimes. I spent the next hour talking with these voices from the past. They told me about their lives, their families, their dreams. Dusty Dog was saving money to buy his own trucking company. Desert Rose was driving to support her 3 kids after her husband left. Nevada Jim was a Korean War veteran who found peace in the endless miles of highway. As I got closer to Ely, their voices started fading. One by one, they said goodbye and signed off, until I was alone again with just the static and the empty road. But just before I lost the signal completely, Highway Ghost came back on. Mountain Mama, you still there? I'm here, Highway Ghost. I got something to tell you. Something important. What is it? That stretch of road you're coming up on, between mile marker 200 and 205. Be careful there. Real careful. Why? What's wrong with it? Can't say exactly. Just know that it's where the road gets hungry sometimes. Where it takes people. Don't stop, don't pull over, don't even slow down if you can help it. His voice was fading fast now, breaking up with static. Highway ghost, I can barely hear you. Just remember. His voice came through one last time, distant and echoing. Some roads have appetites, and Highway 50 is one of the hungriest. Then there was nothing but static. I drove through the section he'd warned me about with my hands gripped tight on the wheel and my foot steady on the gas. Nothing happened, but I could feel something watching me from the darkness beyond my headlights. Something patient and waiting. I made it to Ely's safely and stopped for fuel and coffee. When I asked the night clerk about CB radio reception in the area, he just shrugged. Gets weird out here sometimes, he said. Truckers tell all kinds of stories about voices on the radio. Me, I just figure it's atmospheric conditions or something. But I knew better. Highway 50 had shown me something that night. Let me touch the lives of drivers who'd traveled this road decades before me. For one night, the loneliest road in America had been filled with voices and stories and the kind of companionship that only truckers understand. I still drive Highway 50 regularly, and sometimes, late at night when the stars are bright and the desert is silent, I turn on my CB radio and listen. Most nights there's nothing but static. But once in a while, I hear them again, Dusty Dog and Desert Rose and all the others, still out there somewhere in the space between then and now, keeping each other company on the endless road. And sometimes, just sometimes, I pick up my handset and say, Breaker 19, this is Mountain Mama. Anyone got their ears on? Story 4, The Truck That Followed Me. My name's Pete, and I've been driving for 31 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Bad weather, worse drivers, mechanical breakdowns that left me stranded in the middle of nowhere. But I'd never experienced pure terror until that night in Louisiana. I was hauling a load of furniture from Houston to Jacksonville, taking the I-10 corridor through Louisiana. It was late October, and there was something in the air that made everything feel wrong. Maybe it was the humidity, or the way the fog was rolling in from the Gulf, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It started just after I passed Lake Charles. I was settling in for a long night drive when I noticed headlights in my mirror. Another trucker, maybe half a mile back, nothing unusual about that. I-10 is a busy route, especially at night when drivers try to beat the heat. But this truck was different. It stayed exactly half a mile back, never getting closer, never falling behind. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down, it slowed down. After about an hour of this, I started paying closer attention. The headlights were wrong. They were too bright, almost blue-white instead of the normal yellow. And they were positioned too high, like the truck was bigger than it should be. Every time I looked in my mirror, those lights were there, maintaining that perfect distance. I tried changing lanes to see if it would pass me. It changed lanes too, staying directly behind me. I tried slowing down to 45, thinking maybe the driver just didn't want to pass. It slowed down to 45 too. That's when I started getting scared. I picked up my CB radio. Breaker 19, this is Bayou Pete eastbound on I-10. Got a truck behind me that's been following me for over an hour. Driver, if you can hear me, what's your 20? Nothing but static. I tried again. Truck with the bright headlights about half mile behind me on I-10 eastbound. This is the rig you've been following. Come back if you can hear me. Still nothing. I was coming up on a truck stop near Lafayette, so I decided to pull in and see what this other driver wanted. Maybe he was having radio trouble and trying to get my attention about something wrong with my rig. I put on my signal and took the exit. In my mirror, I watched the other truck's signal come on at the exact same time. It followed me down the ramp and into the truck stop parking lot. I found a spot near the main building and shut down my engine. The other truck pulled into a spot about 6 spaces away, close enough for me to get a good look at it. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a truck, all right, but like nothing I'd ever seen. It looked old, maybe from the 1950s or 1960s, but it was in perfect condition. The cab was solid black with no chrome, no decorations, no company logos. The trailer was black too, unmarked. But the strangest thing was the size. It was huge, bigger than any truck had a right to be. The cab looked like it was 12 feet tall, and the trailer seemed to stretch back forever into the darkness. I sat in my cab for a few minutes, waiting to see if the other driver would get out. The truck just sat there, engine running, those two bright headlights still on even though it was parked. Finally, I climbed down from my cab and walked over toward the black truck. As I got closer, I could hear the engine running, but it didn't sound like any diesel engine I knew. It was quieter, almost like a purr, and it seemed to vibrate through the ground into my bones. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I walked around to the driver's side and knocked on the door. "Hey, driver! You've been following me for the last hour. Something wrong with my rig?" No answer. The engine kept purring, the headlights kept shining, but there was no response from inside the cab. I knocked harder. "Hello? Anyone in there?" That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was no license plate. No DOT numbers. No inspection stickers. Nothing that identified this truck, or made it legal to be on the road. I backed away from the truck and headed for the main building. The night clerk was a young guy reading a magazine behind the counter. "Excuse me," I said, "but do you see that black truck out there?" He looked up from his magazine and glanced out the window. "What black truck?" I turned around to point, and the truck was gone. The parking space was empty like it had never been there at all. "There was a truck right there," I said. "Big black truck, no markings." The clerk shrugged. "I've been watching the parking lot all night. Haven't seen any black truck." I went back outside and looked around the entire lot. Nothing. No tire tracks, no oil stains, no sign that a truck had ever been parked there. I got back in my rig and pulled onto I-10, thinking maybe I'd been more tired than I realized. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But as soon as I got up to highway speed, the headlights appeared in my mirror again. Same distance, same position, same too bright glow. This time I was really scared. I grabbed my CB and put out a general call. "Any trucks eastbound on I-10 between Lafayette and Baton Rouge, this is Bayou Pete. Got an emergency situation here. There's a truck following me that won't respond to radio calls, and I think the driver might be having medical problems." A voice crackled back immediately. "This is Gator Bait eastbound about 10 miles ahead of you. What's the truck look like?" "Big black truck, no markings, headlights are too bright. I don't see any truck behind you, Bayou Pete. You sure you got a follower?" I looked in my mirror. The lights were there, clear as day. "Positive, Gator Bait. He's been behind me for 2 hours now." "Well, I got a clear view of the road behind you for about 2 miles, and you're the only truck I see." That's when I realized that other people couldn't see it. Whatever was following me, it was invisible to everyone else. I tried everything I could think of. I sped up to 80, it kept pace. I slowed down to 35, it slowed down too. I took random exits and got back on the highway, it followed every move. I even tried stopping on the shoulder with my hazard lights on, it stopped too, maintaining that perfect distance. The worst part was that it never got tired. I was exhausted, running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline, but the thing behind me never wavered, never fell back, never showed any sign of fatigue. Around 4 in the morning, I was getting desperate. I hadn't slept in 20 hours, and I was starting to make mistakes. Drifting in my lane, missing exits, forgetting to signal. I needed to rest, but I was afraid to stop with that thing following me. That's when I remembered something my grandfather used to tell me. He was a trucker too, back in the old days, and he used to talk about ghost trucks that would follow drivers on lonely highways. He said the only way to get rid of them was to confront them directly. I found a rest area near Gonzales and pulled in. The black truck followed me into the parking lot and stopped in its usual position, 6 spaces away. I sat in my cab for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Then I got out and walked straight toward it. As I got closer, the purring of the engine got louder, and I could feel that strange vibration in my bones. The headlights seemed to get brighter, almost blinding. But I kept walking until I was standing right next to the driver's door. "What do you want?" I shouted at the dark windows. "Why are you following me?" The engine sound changed, became higher pitched, almost like a whine. The truck started rocking slightly, like something inside was moving around. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied, because I was terrified. "If you want something, tell me what it is." The rocking stopped. The engine went quiet. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. Then the driver's window started rolling down. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that truck as fast as possible. But I was frozen in place, watching that dark window descend inch by inch. When it was halfway down, I heard a voice from inside the cab. It was my own voice, speaking my own words, but with a flat, emotionless tone that made my skin crawl. "I'm not afraid of you," the voice said. "If you want something, tell me what it is." Then the window rolled back up, the engine started purring again, and the truck pulled out of the parking lot onto the highway. I stood there shaking for 10 minutes before I could move. When I finally got back to my rig, I called my dispatcher and told him I needed to take a day off for personal reasons. I wasn't lying after what I just experienced. I needed time to process what had happened. I spent that day in a motel near Baton Rouge, trying to make sense of it all. I called my grandfather, but he'd been dead for 15 years. I looked up information about ghost trucks online, but found nothing that matched what I'd experienced. The next night, I got back on the road to finish my delivery to Jacksonville. I was nervous, constantly checking my mirrors, but the black truck never reappeared. I made it to my destination without incident. That was 3 months ago, and I haven't seen the truck since. But I've heard stories from other drivers about a black truck that follows people on I-10 through Louisiana. Some say it's the ghost of a driver who died in an accident. Others think it's something else entirely, something that feeds on fear and exhaustion. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real. And I know that somewhere out there on the dark highways, it's still looking for its next victim. Still maintaining that perfect distance, still following with those two bright lights, still waiting for someone to get curious enough to walk up to the driver's window. If you ever see it in your mirrors, my advice is simple: don't stop, don't engage, and whatever you do, don't get out of your truck. Some things on the highway are better left alone, and that black truck is definitely one of them. The road has its own rules, its own dangers, and its own hungry ghosts. All we can do is keep driving and hope we never attract their attention. Story 5. The Rest Stop Shadow People. This story comes from my buddy Marcus, who drove long haul for 12 years before he quit the business last year. Marcus was always the practical type, never believed in ghost stories or supernatural stuff. That's what makes what happened to him so unsettling. It was a Tuesday night in early December, and Marcus was driving from Portland to Phoenix with a load of Christmas decorations. He'd been on the road for about 8 hours and was feeling the fatigue set in. The rain was coming down hard, making visibility poor, and he needed a break. He saw a sign for a rest area coming up along I-84 in Oregon, somewhere between the Dalles and Pendleton. It wasn't one of the big, well-lit truck stops, just a basic rest area with picnic tables, restrooms, and a few parking spaces. But it was better than nothing. The rest area was completely empty when he pulled in. No other trucks, no cars, just empty parking spaces and a couple of dim streetlights fighting against the darkness. Marcus parked near the restroom building and shut off his engine. The silence was immediate and complete. No traffic noise from the highway, no wind, no sound of rain, even though he could see it still falling in his headlights. It was like stepping into a soundproof room. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and headed for the restrooms. The building was old, probably built in the 1960s, with that institutional look that all government buildings have. Concrete blocks, small windows, heavy metal doors. The kind of place that feels cold even in summer. The men's room was basic but clean. As Marcus was washing his hands, he noticed something odd in the mirror above the sink. There seemed to be more shadows in the room than there should be, dark shapes that moved independently of their sources. At first, he thought it was just his tired eyes playing tricks on him. After driving all day, it's common to see things that aren't really there. But as he watched, one of the shadows definitely moved across the wall behind him, even though he was standing perfectly still. He turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the empty restroom with its flickering fluorescent lights. Marcus dried his hands and headed back to his truck, but as he walked across the parking lot, he became aware that he wasn't alone. There were shapes moving in his peripheral vision, always just outside the range of his flashlight beam. When he turned to look directly at them, they disappeared. Back in his truck, Marcus tried to shake off the feeling that he was being watched. He planned to take a quick nap before continuing to Phoenix, but something about this place was making him nervous. He decided to get back on the highway. That's when he realized his keys were missing. He searched his pockets, checked the seat, looked on the floor of the cab. Nothing. The keys were gone. Marcus grabbed his flashlight again and retraced his steps to the restroom, thinking he might have dropped them there. The building was just as empty as before, but now the shadows seemed more active, moving across the walls and ceiling like they were alive. He searched the restroom thoroughly but found no keys. As he was about to leave, he heard footsteps in the women's restroom next door. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone pacing back and forth. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "Is someone in there? I lost my keys and I'm wondering if you might have seen them." The footsteps stopped. Then, after a moment, they resumed, but now they were moving toward the door between the two restrooms. Marcus waited, but no one came out. The footsteps just stopped at the door and stayed there. He went around to the women's restroom entrance and knocked. "Excuse me, is everything all right in there?" No answer. But he could see light under the door, and he could hear someone breathing on the other side. "Ma'am, I don't mean to bother you, but I lost my truck keys and I'm stranded here. Could you help me look for them?" Still no answer. The breathing continued, slow and steady, like someone sleeping. Marcus tried the door handle. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open slowly and shined his flashlight inside. The restroom was empty. No one there. But the breathing sounds continued, coming from all around him now instead of from any specific direction. That's when he saw them clearly for the first time. The shadows weren't just tricks of light or fatigue-induced hallucinations. They were entities, dark human-shaped figures that moved independently of any light source. There were dozens of them, maybe more, filling the restroom and spilling out into the parking lot. They weren't solid, but they weren't exactly transparent either. They looked like people-shaped holes cut out of reality, darker than the darkness around them. And they were all looking at him. Marcus backed out of the restroom as fast as he could, but the shadow people followed him. They moved silently, gliding across the ground without walking, always staying just at the edge of his vision until he tried to look directly at them. He ran back to his truck and tried the doors, hoping he'd somehow missed the keys in his panic. Still locked. He checked his pockets again. Nothing. The shadow people were gathering around his truck now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They formed a loose circle around the parking lot, just standing there, watching him with whatever they used for eyes. Marcus pulled out his cell phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Not even one bar. He was completely cut off from the outside world. That's when he noticed the sounds. At first, it was just whispering, like wind through leaves. But as he listened closer, he realized it was voices. Dozens of voices, all talking at once, but too quiet to make out individual words. The shadow people were talking to each other. Marcus climbed up on the running board of his truck to get a better view of the rest area. What he saw made him dizzy with fear. The shadow people weren't just around his truck. They filled the entire rest area, covering every square foot of pavement, climbing on the buildings, even hanging from the street lights. There were thousands of them, all gathered around him like he was the main attraction at some kind of dark carnival. And they were getting bolder. The ones closest to his truck were starting to reach toward him with arms that seemed to stretch longer than arms should stretch. Marcus jumped down from the running board and backed against his truck. What do you want? He shouted at the shadow people. I don't have anything you could possibly need. The whispering stopped. Every single shadow person turned to look at him directly. The silence was more terrifying than the voices had been. Then one of them spoke. Its voice was like static on a radio, words formed from white noise and empty air. You stopped, it said. You chose to stop. I needed to use the restroom, Marcus said. That's what rest areas are for. Not this one. Another shadow person said, this voice slightly different but equally unnatural. This one is for us. For gathering, said a third voice. For waiting, added a fourth. Waiting for what? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. For travelers who stop, the first voice replied. For people who choose to leave their protection. Marcus looked back at his truck. My keys. You took my keys so I can't leave. We take nothing, the shadow person said. We offer choices. You can leave anytime you want. How? I don't have my keys. Keys are for machines. You have feet. You can walk. Marcus looked around at the dark highway beyond the rest area. It was at least 20 miles to the next town, and the rain was still coming down. In this weather, on foot, he'd never make it. That's not a real choice, he said. All choices are real, the shadow person replied. Some are just harder than others. The circle of shadow people began to close in. Not fast, not threatening, just a slow, inexorable movement that reduced the space around Marcus inch by inch. What happens if I stay? He asked. You become like us, the shadow person said. You wait with us for the next traveler who stops. And if I walk? You might make it to the highway. You might not. But you get to choose. Marcus looked at the shadow people, then at the dark road leading back to the highway. Both options seemed impossible, but staying here meant certain doom while walking at least offered a chance, however slim. He started backing toward the rest area exit, keeping his eyes on the shadow people. They watched him go but didn't try to stop him. When he reached the edge of the pavement, one of them called out to him. Your keys are in the ignition, it said. Marcus turned to look back at his truck. Through the windshield, he could see his key ring hanging from the ignition switch, just like always. They were there the whole time? He asked. You stopped looking, the shadow person replied. Fear makes people stop looking for solutions. Marcus ran back to his truck as fast as he could. The keys were indeed in the ignition, exactly where he always left them. He started the engine and pulled out of the rest area without looking back. As he drove away, he caught one last glimpse of the shadow people in his mirrors. They were waving goodbye, their dark forms dissolving back into ordinary shadows cast by the street lights. Marcus drove straight through to Phoenix without stopping, not even for fuel. He had enough gas to make it, and he wasn't taking any chances on encountering those things again. When he told me this story, he insisted that the shadow people hadn't been evil, just territorial. They were protecting their space, their gathering place, but they'd given him a choice. That made it somehow worse, he said. Evil you can fight against, but something that offers you choices and makes you responsible for the consequences is much more frightening. Marcus quit driving long haul 6 months later. He said he could never feel safe at rest stops anymore, always wondering if the shadows were just shadows or something more. He drives local routes now, home every night, never having to stop at strange places in the darkness. I've driven past that rest area a few times since he told me this story. It looks normal during the day, just picnic tables and restrooms and empty parking spaces. But I've never stopped there, and I never will. Some places belong to us, and some places belong to them. The trick is learning to tell the difference before you step out of your truck and find yourself in a place where you don't belong. The highway has its own ecosystem, its own predators and prey. Most of the time, we truckers are at the top of the food chain, protected by our big rigs and our CB radios and our knowledge of the road. But sometimes, when we stop in the wrong place at the wrong time, we discover that there are things out there that see us as nothing more than travelers who made a poor choice. Marcus was lucky. He got to choose, and he chose to leave. Not everyone who stops at that rest area is so fortunate. Story 6. The Highway That Loops Forever. This one happened to a driver named Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been hauling freight for about 8 years when he encountered something that shouldn't exist on any map. Tommy was driving from Flagstaff to Albuquerque with a load of computer equipment, a route he'd taken dozens of times before. It was a straightforward run, take I-40 east for about 220 miles, maybe 4 hours of driving depending on traffic and weather. It was early March, and the weather was clear. Perfect driving conditions. Tommy left Flagstaff around 6 p.m., planning to arrive in Albuquerque by 10 p.m. and grab a hotel room for the night. The first hour went exactly as expected. He passed through Winona, crossed the Little Colorado River, and was making good time. But somewhere around the 7:30 mark, things started to feel wrong. The landscape looked different. Instead of the familiar red rock formations and desert scrub that lined I-40, he was seeing terrain that didn't match his memory of the route. Rolling hills, different vegetation, rock formations that seemed more like something you'd see in Utah or Colorado. Tommy figured maybe he'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, even though he couldn't remember turning off the main highway. He checked his GPS, and it showed him on I-40 heading east, exactly where he should be. But the mile markers were wrong. He'd been driving for over an hour, so he should be passing mile marker 250 or so. Instead, the last marker he'd seen was 201. The same marker he'd seen 30 minutes earlier. Tommy pulled over at the next exit to check his map and get his bearings. The exit sign read, Exit 201 Winona. But he'd passed Winona an hour ago. This was impossible. He took the exit and found himself in what looked like the same Winona he'd driven through earlier. Same gas station, same truck stop, same buildings. But when he checked his watch, it was 7:45 p.m. He'd been driving for almost 2 hours. Tommy went into the truck stop and asked the clerk for directions to Albuquerque. Just get back on I-40 East, the clerk said. About 4 hours from here. 4 hours? But I've been driving east for 2 hours already. The clerk looked at him strangely. I don't know what to tell you, buddy. Albuquerque's about 220 miles east of here. Always has been. Tommy bought a cup of coffee and studied his map. According to every map he looked at, Winona was mile marker 233, not 201. But the exit sign clearly said 201, and his GPS confirmed it. He decided to continue east and see what happened. Maybe his GPS was malfunctioning, or maybe there was construction that had changed the mile markers. Back on I-40, Tommy drove carefully, paying close attention to the landscape and mile markers. Everything looked normal for about 40 minutes. Then he started seeing the same rock formations he'd seen an hour earlier. The same distinctive red mesa, the same oddly shaped boulder beside the highway. And then he saw the sign. Exit 201 Winona. He was back where he'd started, even though he'd been driving east the entire time. According to his odometer, he'd traveled another 60 miles, but somehow he'd ended up at the exact same exit. Tommy pulled over again, this time more confused than scared. He got out of his truck and looked around. The landscape was identical to what he'd seen before. Same mountains in the distance, same placement of power lines, everything exactly the same. He tried calling his dispatcher on his cell phone, but there was no signal. His CB radio was working, but when he tried to raise another trucker, all he got was static. This time, Tommy decided to take the exit and head back west toward Flagstaff. Maybe he could figure out what was going wrong and start over. But when he got back on the highway heading west, the same thing happened. After about an hour of driving, he found himself back at exit 201 Winona, even though he'd been traveling in the opposite direction. Now he was scared. This defied every law of physics and geography he knew. You can't drive in a straight line and end up where you started unless you're going in a circle, and I-40 through Arizona definitely doesn't make any circles. Tommy parked at the truck stop again and went inside. The same clerk was behind the counter, but when Tommy looked at him closely, something was off. The man looked exactly the same as before, wearing the same clothes, even had the same coffee stain on his shirt. It was like he'd been frozen in time. "Excuse me," Tommy said. "What time is it?" The clerk looked at the clock on the wall. 7:45. 7:45? But I was here an hour ago, and it was 7:45 then too. The clerk smiled, but it was an empty smile, like someone had drawn it on his face. "Time moves different around here sometimes. Especially at night." "What do you mean?" "Some roads don't want to let you go. They get attached to travelers, especially truckers. You boys spend so much time on the highway, maybe sometimes the highway decides to keep you." Tommy backed away from the counter. "That's impossible. Roads don't think. They don't want things. Don't they?" the clerk asked. "You ever notice how some roads feel friendly and some feel hostile? How some stretches of highway seem to go on forever while others pass by in no time? Roads have personalities, just like people. And this particular stretch of I-40 has always been possessive." Tommy ran back to his truck and tried a different approach. Instead of taking I-40, he'd find a side road, any side road, and see if he could break out of whatever was happening. He found a small state highway that headed north and followed it for about 20 miles. The landscape changed, becoming more mountainous, with pine trees instead of desert scrub. He was making progress, getting away from the loop. But then the road curved, and he found himself back on I-40. And there, ahead of him, was the familiar sign. "Exit 201 Winona." Tommy tried every side road he could find. Some led through small towns, others through empty desert, a few wound through mountain passes. But they all eventually led back to the same place. Like all roads in this area were connected by some invisible gravitational pull to exit 201. After his fifth attempt to escape, Tommy pulled into the truck stop parking lot and just sat in his cab, trying to think. He checked his watch, still 7:45 p.m. His fuel gauge showed the same level it had shown 2 hours ago, even though he'd been driving continuously. That's when he noticed the other trucks. There were 3 of them parked in the far corner of the lot, partly hidden in the shadows. He hadn't seen them during his previous stops, but now they were clearly visible. All 3 were older models, probably from the 1980s or 1990s, and they looked like they'd been sitting there for a long time. Tommy walked over to investigate. The first truck was covered in dust and had flat tires. The license plates were expired by several years. The second truck was in similar condition, but when Tommy looked through the windshield, he could see personal belongings scattered around the cab: clothes, food wrappers, a logbook. The third truck had someone in it. A man was sitting behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. Tommy knocked on the window, and the man slowly turned to look at him. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes that held a look of absolute defeat. The man rolled down his window. "You stuck too?" he asked. "Stuck how?" "In the loop." "How long you been driving exit 201? "About 3 hours," Tommy said. "What about you?" The man laughed bitterly. "I stopped counting after the first month. That was in 1998. 1998? But that's impossible. It's 2023. Is it? Time doesn't mean much when you're stuck in the same hour forever. I've been trying to get to Denver since March 15th, 1998. Keep ending up back here no matter which way I go." Tommy stared at the man. "You've been here for 25 years? Give or take. Hard to tell when the clocks don't move and the sun never sets. You see those other trucks? Same story. Jim over there has been here since 1987. Says he was trying to get to Phoenix. Carl's been here since 1991, heading to Dallas. But this is insane. People must be looking for you. Your families, your companies." The man shrugged. "Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But they won't find us here. This place exists outside normal time and space. We're not really on I-40 anymore. We're in some kind of fold in reality, and the only people who end up here are truckers who happen to hit this spot at exactly the wrong time. There has to be a way out." Tommy said. There's always a way out. I thought so too, for the first few years. Tried everything you probably tried. Different roads, different directions, even tried going off-road through the desert. Always end up back at exit 201. The highway won't let us go. Tommy felt panic rising in his chest. No. I'm not accepting this. There has to be something we haven't tried. He spent the next several loops experimenting with different approaches. He tried driving backwards down I-40. He tried abandoning his truck and walking. He even tried sleeping in his cab to see if time would advance while he was unconscious. Nothing worked. Every attempt ended the same way back at exit 201 at 7:45 p.m., with the same clerk behind the counter giving him the same empty smile. After what felt like days but was probably only hours in loop time, Tommy was ready to give up. He understood now why the other truckers just sat in their cabs staring ahead. When you're trapped in an impossible situation with no way out, eventually your mind just shuts down to protect itself. But then he had an idea. He'd been assuming that the problem was the highway itself, that somehow this stretch of I-40 had become cursed or haunted. But what if the problem wasn't the road? What if it was the destination? Every trucker trapped here had been heading somewhere specific. Denver, Phoenix, Dallas. What if the highway was trying to help them, not hurt them? What if it was keeping them from reaching destinations they were never supposed to reach? Tommy thought about his own trip to Albuquerque. He was delivering computer equipment to a company there. But now that he thought about it, there had been something odd about the job. The pickup had been rushed, the paperwork had been incomplete, and the delivery address was in a part of town he'd never been to. What if this wasn't a legitimate delivery? What if he was unknowingly involved in something illegal, and the highway was protecting him from making a terrible mistake? He drove back to exit 201 one more time, but instead of trying to continue east or west, he pulled into the truck stop and went inside. I want to call my dispatcher, he told the clerk. Cancel my delivery. For the first time, the clerk's expression changed. He looked surprised, maybe even pleased. There's a phone booth around back, he said. Tommy found the phone booth and called his company. He told his dispatcher that he was having mechanical problems and wouldn't be able to make the delivery to Albuquerque. He suggested they assign the load to another driver. When he hung up the phone, he felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He walked back to his truck and started the engine. This time, when he pulled onto I-40 heading east, the landscape looked normal. The mile markers were in the correct sequence, and his GPS showed his location accurately. 2 hours later, he was in Albuquerque, but instead of making his delivery, he checked into a hotel and called his dispatcher again to confirm that the load had been reassigned. The next morning, Tommy saw on the news that the FBI had raided the company he was supposed to deliver to. They were running a money laundering operation through fake computer equipment sales. Several truck drivers had been arrested as unwitting accomplices. Tommy realized that the highway loop hadn't been a trap, it had been a protection. Somehow, that stretch of I-40 had sensed that he was heading into trouble and had kept him safe until he made the right choice. He never told anyone this story, except me, and only after I'd shared some of my own strange experiences on the road. But Tommy still drives that route regularly, and sometimes, when he passes exit 201, he waves at the truck stop in gratitude. The other truckers are still there, he says. Still trapped in their loops, still unable to let go of destinations that would have destroyed them. Maybe someday they'll figure out what Tommy figured out, that sometimes being lost is better than being found, and sometimes the road knows better than we do where we're supposed to end up. The highway has its own wisdom, its own way of protecting those who serve it faithfully. We just have to be smart enough to listen when it's trying to tell us something important. Story 7. The Cargo That Moved by Itself. This last story comes from a driver named Sarah Chin, who hauled specialized freight for a company that asked no questions and paid very well. Sarah had been with them for 5 years and had learned not to ask what she was carrying or where it came from. The money was too good, and the loads were always legal according to the paperwork. But on a cold February night in Montana, Sarah picked up a load that changed everything she thought she knew about her job. The pickup was at a warehouse outside Billings, an unmarked building in an industrial area where she never made a pickup before. The loading crew worked in complete silence, using a forklift to load 6 identical crates into her trailer. Each crate was about the size of a coffin, made of heavy wooden planks with metal reinforcing straps. The shipping manifest listed the contents as antique furniture, but the crates were too heavy for furniture. Sarah's truck was rated for 80,000 pounds gross weight, and these 6 crates pushed her right up to the legal limit. Whatever was inside them was dense and heavy. The delivery address was in Seattle, with instructions to arrive at a specific warehouse between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. No earlier, no later. Sarah had made deliveries like this before rich collectors who wanted their acquisitions delivered privately, away from prying eyes. She left Billings around noon, planning to drive straight through. It was about 670 miles to Seattle, roughly 12 hours of driving time with stops for fuel and food. If she maintained a good pace, she'd arrive right in the middle of the delivery window. The first few hours went smoothly. I-94 west to I-90, then northwest toward Seattle. Sarah listened to music, talked to other drivers on the CB, and made good time despite the winter weather. But as the sun went down, and she entered the mountains of western Montana, things started to feel wrong. It began with sounds from the trailer. Soft thumping noises, like something shifting around back there. Sarah figured it was just the crates settling as she went around curves and over hills. Heavy cargo does that sometimes, especially on mountain roads. But the sounds became more frequent and more rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. Always 3 beats, then silence, then 3 beats again. Sarah pulled over at a rest area near Missoula to check her load. The crates were exactly where they'd been loaded, secured with the same chains and straps. Nothing had shifted or come loose. But as she walked around the trailer, she could swear she heard something moving inside the crates. She put her ear against one of them and listened. There was definitely something in there, something that sounded almost like breathing. Slow, deep breaths that didn't match any kind of furniture or antique she could imagine. Sarah got back in her truck and called her dispatcher. "Hey, it's Sarah. I'm wondering if you can tell me more about this load I picked up in Billings. What do you need to know? The manifest says antique furniture, but these crates are making sounds. Like there's something alive in them." There was a long pause. "Sarah, you know the company policy. We don't ask questions about cargo as long as the paperwork is legitimate. Your job is to drive, not to investigate. But if there are animals in here, they might need water or air or..." "There are no animals." The dispatcher cut her off. "The manifest says antique furniture, so that's what you're hauling. Do your job and make the delivery." He hung up without another word. Sarah sat in her truck for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to follow company policy, make the delivery, and collect her pay. But the sounds from the trailer were getting louder and more disturbing. She decided to continue driving and see what happened. Maybe the sounds would stop, or maybe she'd figure out a logical explanation. But as she drove deeper into the Idaho mountains, the situation got worse. The thumping became more violent, like something was trying to break out of the crates. She could feel the impacts through the trailer, strong enough to rock the entire truck. Then she started hearing voices. At first, she thought it was her CB radio picking up distant transmissions. But when she turned the radio off, the voices continued. They were coming from the trailer, muffled but clearly human. Multiple voices, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Sarah pulled over again, this time at a truck stop in Coeur d'Alene. She walked around her trailer, and the voices got clearer. They were definitely coming from inside the crates, and they sounded desperate. Pleading. Begging for help. She tried calling the police, but what could she tell them? That she was hauling cargo that made sounds? That voices were coming from crates labeled as antique furniture? They'd think she was crazy. Instead, she called her dispatcher again. This time, he was less patient. "Sarah, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully. That cargo is worth more money than you'll ever see in your lifetime. The people who own it are not the kind of people you want to disappoint. Make the delivery exactly as instructed, and forget about whatever you think you're hearing. What if there are people in those crates? What if they're being trafficked? There are no people in those crates, the dispatcher said firmly. And even if there were, that's not your problem. Your problem is getting that cargo to Seattle on time. The line went dead. Sarah sat in her truck, paralyzed by indecision. If there were people trapped in those crates, she couldn't just deliver them to whoever was waiting in Seattle. But if she called the authorities and was wrong, she'd lose her job and probably face legal troubles. That's when she heard someone calling for help in English. "Please," came a woman's voice from the trailer. "Someone help us. We can't breathe." That decided it. Sarah called 911. The Idaho State Police arrived within 20 minutes, along with federal agents who seemed to know more about Sarah's cargo than they were letting on. They had cutting tools ready, like they'd been expecting this call. When they opened the first crate, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Inside was a young woman, maybe 20 years old, bound and gagged and barely conscious. The other 5 crates contained more people, men and women of various ages, all in the same condition. The federal agents explained that Sarah's trucking company had been under investigation for months. They were part of a human trafficking network that moved people across the country using legitimate-looking freight operations. Sarah's dispatcher and several other employees were arrested that night. Sarah learned later that the victims had been kidnapped from various locations and were being transported to Seattle for sale to the highest bidders. If she made the delivery as instructed, those 6 people would have disappeared forever into a world of slavery and abuse. The strangest part of the whole experience was what one of the rescued victims told her afterward. The woman who'd called for help in English said that she and the others had been drugged into unconsciousness when they were loaded into the crates. They shouldn't have been able to make any sounds at all. But something woke us up, she told Sarah. Something that wanted us to be heard. We all felt it at the same time, like a voice in our heads telling us to make noise, to call for help. None of us could move much, but we could thump against the crates and use what little voice we had left. Sarah never found out what that something was that woke up the victims. Maybe it was just survival instinct kicking in as the drugs wore off. Maybe it was divine intervention. Or maybe it was something else entirely, some force that looks out for the innocent and makes sure their cries for help are heard by the right people at the right time. Sarah quit the trucking business after that night. She couldn't trust herself to haul freight without wondering what was really in the trailer. She became a local delivery driver instead, hauling goods around town where she could see everything being loaded and unloaded. She's not hauling anything that could make sounds but from other trucks on the highway, other drivers who might be unknowingly carrying human cargo. She always calls the authorities when she hears those voices, even though they usually find nothing. Better to be wrong and embarrassed than to ignore a genuine cry for help. The road has its own justice system, Sarah learned. Sometimes it protects the innocent by making their voices heard. Sometimes it punishes the guilty by exposing their crimes. And sometimes it puts the right people in the right place at the right time to make sure justice is done. Not all horror stories on the highway involve ghosts or supernatural entities. Some of the worst horrors are entirely human, created by people who see other people as nothing more than cargo to be bought and sold. But even in those dark situations, there are forces at work. Call them guardian angels, call them karma, call them whatever you want, that makes sure evil doesn't always win. Sarah's truck may have been carrying victims that night, but in the end, it carried them to freedom. And that's what she chooses to remember when she thinks about her last night as a long-haul trucker. Not the horror of what could have happened, but the miracle of what did happen instead. The highway has many stories to tell, and not all of them end in tragedy. Sometimes, if we're listening carefully enough, we can hear the voices that need to be heard and become the heroes that someone desperately needs. These are the 7 trucker horror stories that have stayed with me over the years. Each one taught me something different about the road and the things that travel it. The highway is more than just asphalt and white lines. It's a living thing with its own personality, its own dangers, and its own strange mercy. Drive safe out there, and always listen to what the road is trying to tell you.